want to be the number one pick really badly. It's been a dream of mine since I was a little kid, and I feel I would fit well in Boston.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Floyd and we're going to be looking at the Boston Celtics season in review show today. I forgot to mention you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball and Facebook at facebook.com/redrockbasketball. And don't forget, this podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. You hopefully have heard our Locked On mock draft across on Locked On NBA, where all of the hosts of all the Locked On NBA or Locked On podcasts have been acting as GMs for their team and doing a mock draft. So go and check that out. And also, if you are new to the show and have heard me across on Locked On NBA, welcome. We're doing, there's not much happening in fantasy at this point of the year, but it's always a good idea to be able to get yourself prepared, and that's what these season in review shows do. And then we'll be going all the way through the off-season into the pre-season and really ramping things up when we head into September and October for the fantasy season to begin. So welcome if you are a new listener. If you do enjoy the podcast, please leave a review on iTunes. It is the best way of helping this show out, and I do absolutely 100% appreciate everybody who has done that so far. So if you could get and do that, that would be awesome. If you could leave that review, I would be much appreciative of that. As I said, we are talking about the Boston Celtics in today's show, so
let's get to it.
I don't know, about 8 hours before I've recorded this podcast, Adrian Wojnarowski, Sam Amick, Mark Stein, Zach Lowe, they're all reporting the same thing, that the Celtics are sending the number one pick to the Philadelphia 76ers. This hasn't obviously been officially confirmed, but it appears that they are, and they're not reporting that it's 100% done, but everything that they're saying says that it's pretty bloody likely that pick one from the Celtics will not be pick one for the Celtics. It will end up going to Philadelphia with them giving back pick 3. And obviously some future assets. Now, what those future assets entail, we don't know. What they are reporting is that it won't be players, so it won't be Dario Saric, it won't be Timothé Luwawu-Cabarrot, it won't be Jahlil Okafor, is the understanding that I'm getting at this point. That could all change by the time you're listening to this. But it's likely to be pick 3. And then we're looking at picks for next season, where the Sixers have their own first rounder. They've got the Lakers' unprotected first rounder. And then in 2019, they've got their own first rounder and the Kings' unprotected first rounder. So they've got some pretty interesting first round draft choices coming up. The understanding, or my understanding with this trading of the number one pick, won't be for the Celtics to necessarily get themselves 3 and then get themselves maybe 2 first rounders next year in addition to that Brooklyn pick, and put themselves in a that could potentially put them with having 3 of the top 4 picks next year. If they got, say, the Nets pick, the Lakers picks, and the Sixers pick, that wouldn't be a crazy thing to think that they could get that. But to me, it puts the Celtics more likely in line to package those assets, pick 3, and then potentially 2 or 3 top 5 picks next year to get themselves Jimmy Butler. And that's the way I see it going down, and then those high picks would end up with the Chicago Bulls, and they no doubt would stuff them up. That's just the way that things go, and that is how I see all this panning out. It's going to be really interesting to see if it actually does go down and what assets the Sixers send back to the Celtics, but I don't think the Celtics are doing it just so they can acquire more future assets. I think they'll be looking to really turn those assets into something. Now, whether that's the right way to go, I'm not sure. It really depends on what they get back, and if they can turn that into someone like Butler, which all remains to be seen. It's all conjecture at this point, but it is looking like that's the way things are going to go. So that discussion of Markelle Fultz heading to Boston, it doesn't appear that that's going to be the case at all, and he'll be in Philly. And I'll talk about that more when we do the mock draft next week and the NBA draft review, when all that stuff actually goes down. So let's talk about what actually happened for the Celtics this season and what how things actually went for this team. Obviously, they were the number 1 seed, lost in the conference finals to the Cavs 4-1. in that one. They finished with a 53-29 record, which overperformed their expected win-loss based on point differential by 5 wins. So a successful season that may not be 100% replicable, but they're also looking to get better by these increased assets, whether it is Fultz, whether it is signing Gordon Hayward or Blake Griffin, whether it is bringing in Jimmy Butler or a combination of those things. They'll be looking to push forward and look for themselves to become a 57-60 win team. That'd be the aim for the Celtics in the next couple of seasons. As things currently stand, they have pick 1. They have pick 37, 53, and 56. So that pick 37 is a pretty useful pick as well. 53 and 56, not so much, and they will be used on guys that likely won't have any impact whatsoever at any point. But that pick 1 is obviously the real thing that we're concentrating on. They've also got some free agency decisions to make. They've got their pursuit of Gordie Hayward and Blakey Griffin is pretty well known, and it's pretty it's pretty much out there at the moment that they're the two guys. They're not going to be able to get both, but getting both of those guys, or getting one of those guys, is going to be an option for Boston, and that will be something to help push them forward. Now, whether they have to give up a player like Marcus Smart, Avery Bradley, Jay Crowder in that Jimmy Butler deal remains to be seen, but you would think the Bulls would be looking to ask for something along those lines. There are other free agency questions. We've got 3 guys on non-guaranteed deals. Tyler Zeller, $8 million non-guaranteed. Jordan Mickey, $1.5 million non-guaranteed. And Demetrius Jackson at $1.4 million non-guaranteed. And those could easily just be cut, or depending on what happens with free agency, bringing in Butler, bringing in Hayward, bringing in Griffin, potentially these sort of players, and you might need that cap space, especially with Zeller's $8 million guaranteed. And it's not like they're providing great value. Though I was relatively impressed with the limited bits we saw of Jackson through the season, and some of his D-League stuff was okay as well. But with the amount of point guards on this team at the moment, it's hard. But could Terry Rozier be going to Chicago? Could not Jim Butler, could who's the other guy? Marcus Smart, that's the other one. Could Marcus Smart be going in a trade to Chicago? You know, we all think that Fultz was going to come in. Maybe he doesn't come in. So maybe their point guard depth isn't as big as what it was anticipated to be earlier on. And that then opens up some possibilities for Jackson to remain around and work into a third point guard role. The other free agency decisions, we've got Amir Johnson, who was their starting power forward center, however you want to classify that this season. Jonas Jerebko, who I think is quite a valuable player. We've got James Young, is an unrestricted free agent. Gerald Green, who inexplicably started games in the playoffs. And of course, my boy Kelly Olynyk is a restricted free agent. All of these guys, they could just have to renounce the rights on them if they are bringing in guys like Hayward and Griffin, which we don't know. But there is some decisions there, especially with Amir Johnson and Kelly Olynyk. I would doubt that Amir is back, but Kelly, I think that they would want to bring back. From a fantasy point of view, we would want Kelly to go somewhere else where he's going to get stable, consistent, and minutes that are more applicable to his talent level. But if he stays in Boston, the same sort of bullshit that's gone on with him for 4 seasons, with his minutes being jerked around, will likely continue, and that won't really work all that well in our favour fantasy-wise. This team was 8th in offensive rating and 13th in defensive rating, 13th in pace, so right around the middle in those areas. 3rd in three-point attempt rate, and that was something that they were quite high up on last season, but they were one of the worst three-point shooting teams last season, and they improved that up to 14th this year, getting that three-point percentage up. So that was the ability for them to get that offense up and push their record further forward this year was in large part helped by that. Their defense was also good in terms of they allowed the fifth lowest effective field goal percentage against them, but rim protection has long been a problem. We've seen that, and rebounding has been an issue for them as well. They were 23rd in blocks, and part of playing Al Horford at center, that's one of the trade-offs, is that your defense and your rebounding and your shot blocking isn't going to be as good as what some other teams may be. The highest offensive rating on this team was Demetrius Jackson in his limited playing time, but then we have Isaiah Thomas, Amir Johnson, Jay Crowder, and Al Horford. And on the defensive end, we went Olynyk, Horford, Amir Johnson, and then a tie with 4 guys, Jordan Mickey, Terry Rozier, Marcus Smart, and Avery Bradley. So a lot of names you'd expect there, especially with Smart and Bradley, and I think some people would be surprised to see Olynyk so high up there in defensive rating. They had 5 guys shoot over 40% on corner threes, and a lot of the names you'd expect there as well: Isaiah Thomas, Marcus Smart, maybe to the surprise of some, Jay Crowder, Kelly Olynyk, and Jaylen Brown. That's impressive for him as a rookie, while Jay Crowder was a 74% shooter at the rim. Isaiah Thomas, for all his finishing trickery, didn't crack 60% at the rim, just 59%, but he was still able to pull off ridiculous amounts of shots and be as efficient as he was without having a stupendous rim finishing number. On the other hand, the other point guards, Marcus Smart at 49 and Terry Rozier at 47, that's a big part of why Smart's field goal percentage is as piss poor as it is. Sometimes he can hit the three, but his ability to finish can be a real issue. And another thing that surprised me here is Isaiah Thomas was assisted on 34% of his two-point attempts, which is way higher than I anticipated. It shows that he is capable of playing off ball as well. So if that Fultz-Thomas backcourt does materialize, which it doesn't appear that it will, but if it does materialize, he can play off the ball a little bit and be effective in that role, receiving passes and scoring in that manner. The leader in advanced stats for this team, Demetrius Jackson leads lots of them. He had these great numbers in limited minutes. So he led the team in PER, but realistically it's Isaiah Thomas at 26.5. Demetrius's true shooting was 75. That led the team. Clearly that's not what we're counting here. Amir Johnson had 62.8 to be the highest. Usage, Isaiah Thomas at 34, and remarkably he did it at a true shooting of 62.5, which for a player with that high usage and at that size and that position is truly remarkable, and that's the foundation of his amazing season that he had. He led the team in win shares as well, Isaiah, and in win shares per 48, as well as offensive box score plus minus, and VORP, while Amir Johnson racked up the highest defensive box score plus minus on this team at 2.4. They only had 4 lineups that played over 100 minutes. I was critical at times of Stevens with his rotations. I think he's very quick on the pull on some of them. Their most used lineup, no surprises, Bradley, Crowder, Horford, Amir Johnson, and Isaiah Thomas, which was a plus 6.2 in 432 minutes. But their best 5-man lineup was Crowder, Horford, Amir, Thomas, but Marcus Smart in for Avery Bradley, who and that made that lineup a plus 17.1. The most used 4-man, Bradley, Crowder, Horford, IT, plus 5.6. The best 4-man, Crowder, Horford, Amir, and Smart, plus 17.2. And Marcus Smart's one of these guys that continually appears in the best lineups because he is just a guy that provides winning basketball. The most used 3-man, Crowder, Horford, and IT was a plus 5.7. The best 3-man, Crowder, Amir, Smart, plus 18.9. The most used 2-man, Jay Crowder and Isaiah Thomas, plus 6.7. The best 2-man, well, there was 2 of them, Amir Johnson and Jay Crowder at plus 11.6, or Amir Johnson and Marcus Smart at 11.6. So his name appears quite a lot, and despite the frustrations over Marcus Smart and the flopping and all that sort of bullshit, which is totally fine to have issues with him there, he is a very, very important player, and I think he can be a very good player if he finds himself in a different situation to where he currently is. Now, this is a team that's got 2 really important stash players that we need to pay attention to. And the number one of those guys to me is Ante Zizic, who the 6'11 Croatian center who played for a couple of teams over in Europe last season. 23 minutes a game, he averaged 12.3 points, 6.2 boards, 0.9 steals and 0.9 blocks at 67 and 73 from the field and from the line for a true shooting of 70%, a PER of 24.5 and a net rating of plus 18. With the potential absences of Zala, Jerebko, Amir, and Olynyk, and they could all go, they may not all go, but they could all go, Zizic is going to come over, he is going to be a rotation player immediately, and he is going to be good immediately. I am fairly confident in that. Now, will he be good enough to be a top 100 fantasy player off the bat? Probably not. But depending how things play out in free agency, I wouldn't have an issue with taking him with my last pick in a 12-team league and just to see what happens because he has got an incredible pedigree. The numbers that he was able to perform or produce over in the Adriatic League, they were topped by 2 guys, Nikola Jokic and Jusuf Nurkic. He was a guy that was easily a top 10 prospect last season. To me, in my opinion, he was like the number 3 fantasy guy coming out of that draft from last season. There is opportunity opening up for him to play alongside Al Horford next season. Now, I don't think he's going to come in and start and play 28 minutes because A, he's a rookie. B, Brad Stevens just does not do that. So he might be a 24-minute-a-game guy, but for some reason he comes over and wows, and I reckon he's got a chance to do it. He's going to have a shot at a top 100 season. In a 16-team league, he will be a must-draft guy, no doubt, but you should be valuing this guy as a potential top 100 future player. No doubt in my mind about that. The other guy they've got stashed from last year's draft is Gershon Yabusele, the French big man who played across in China last season, the Dancing Bear, very, very much an upper echelon nickname, the Dancing Bear. He played 30 minutes a game in China, and the stats look stupendous, but that's because he played in China. 20.9 points, 9.5 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.5 steals, 1.1 blocks, 53, 36, and 69 as his shooting splits for a PER of 26, a true shooting of 63, a usage of 28, and a net rating of 22. Like, just crazy numbers for Ubesele. He did play 2 games in the D-League when he came across, averaged 18.5 and 10. So he was still impactful there. The problem with him is how does he fit positionally? He's not going to jump. He's a 4 who plays maybe a little bit of 3, but more of a 4. So if they're going to have Zizic and Horford there in that front court and move Al Horford to the 4, how does Ubesele fit in? He does have a very interesting fantasy game, though, and he is another player who could have top 100 seasons in the future. I don't think he's really going to be worth the Standard League stash early on this season, but he'd be someone I'd look at in a 16 or 18 team league and play that, especially say if Jay Crowder does have to move on in acquiring Jimmy Butler. That could open up some backup 4 minutes for Ubesele there as well. But this Celtics team, it just feels like there is so much in flux. But watch for him, because him and Zizic are probably 2 of the guys who weren't drafted this year who are going to come over and have the largest impact and be the best fantasy options out of that group, with Zizic being the number 1 player in that class to me, unless maybe Milos Teodosic comes across, but I'm not even sure that he is going to come across, or I'm not even sure he's going to be as good as what Zizic is. Let's talk about the players who were on this team last season. We'll start with Isaiah Thomas, who was the 13th ranked player for the year. An absolutely phenomenal season from Thomas. The team was a plus 4.7 with him on the court. He was 9th before the All-Star break and 15th after the All-Star break. And that was something that I did bang on about quite a bit when he had that stretch in December, January, where he was like the number 1 or number 2 player for like a month. And I said, this is unbelievable, but there is absolutely zero chance that it will continue. And it clearly didn't continue, because that sort of level of efficiency, it wasn't able to be maintained. Now, he was still good, but he saw his field goal percentage drop to 45% when he was going at like 47, 48 pre-All-Star. So he did drop down there, and that had an impact on where his ranking went in that time frame. But for the season, 28.9 points, 3 threes, 2.7 rebounds, 5.9 assists, 0.9 steals, 46, 91, and 38 from 3. And as I just talked about on the last show with Cleveland, you talk about Kyrie being a point guard that gets no assists. Well, he had basically the same assists as Isaiah Thomas. So maybe we just need to back off that criticism of Kyrie just a little bit. As for Isaiah Thomas, is this as good as it gets? Yes, I think so. If I had to make a guess, yes, this is as good as it gets. We know that he's coming off a pretty serious hip injury where he's had hip surgery, and that is part of his decline through the playoffs. But the other thing we know about Isaiah Thomas is that he's small. And some of his performances were fine in the playoffs, some of them weren't. He's not able to sustain it under that more intense pressure. Now, fantasy's played through the regular season, so you say, Josh, why do I care what happens to him in the playoffs? Well, to me, they can shut him down a little bit more just with that extra knowledge of how to do it. And how does he progress moving forward as he gets older? How long can these skills remain with him? And I would have to guess that not very long would be the answer, that by the time he becomes a free agent next summer, when he signs that contract, the last years of that contract are going to be yuck. And I talked about Kyle Lowry's 5-year potential max coming being yuck. Isaiah Thomas's is going to be just as bad, and there are going to be concerns. Now, with Fultz potentially or most likely not coming across, then Thomas's future feels a little bit more secure. And you should definitely be looking at him as a top 25 guy. I would not be considering him in that first round range. I would not be considering him in that next LeBron, Chris Paul, John Wall, Jokic, whoever else is in that range. I wouldn't necessarily be considering him, or maybe Lillard and Paul George. I'd probably have those guys ahead of him. He's in that next tier down, maybe in that Kyle Lowry, Kyrie Irving sort of a group, rather than top of the second round. Middle to back end of the second round is where I put Isaiah Thomas as we move forward, because for as good as he was, I just do have the fear that maybe that's it. Maybe that's the peak, and the recovery from the hip injury is going to be really something to watch for. And also to see what they do. Do they bring in Jimmy Butler? And does that impact what Thomas can do? Does it knock him down by a shot a game? Does it knock him down by half an assist a game? And all those things are definitely possible. And that could move him from the 13th ranked player to the 19th ranked player. And that's sort of where I expect him to be next season. Al Horford, lots of criticisms come Horford's ways. The ridiculous criticisms after he suffered that early season concussion were nonsensical. He played 68 games, 32 minutes, 14 and 6.8, 5 assists, which was a huge number for Horford, 0.8 steals, 1.3 blocks, and 1.3 triples, so just missed the triple one, and went 47 and 80 with 36% from three. So obviously he was an impressive player. The 38th ranked player this season, dropped off a little bit post All-Star where he became the 69th ranked player.
Giggity!
And he is, I guess, slightly a better player in rotisserie leagues than head-to-head leagues. Not saying that you avoid him in head-to-head or anything like that, but he's more suited or gets a bump more in rotisserie leagues versus head-to-head leagues because of his ability to contribute pretty much positively in every single category without having huge standout numbers. Now, his numbers as compared to his last season in Atlanta, unsurprisingly, his usage did drop and his points dropped. He hit more threes, but he got 1.8 extra assists, which was, I guess, somewhat out of nowhere. Shot blocking, the steals, that's all the same. A little bit of a drop in his rebounding, but just like a change in his statistics is the best way of putting that. The other thing that dropped was his efficiency, and I see no reason why that can't really start to improve again. And it wasn't because he started taking heaps of threes. Last year, he took 3.1 attempts from three. This year, 3.5. So it wasn't a huge change. In fact, his 3-point percentage went up from 34 to 35. It's just that his shooting dipped from 50.4 to 47.4. Now, there's no reason why he'd been an over 50% shooter the last couple of years. He can get back to 50% and over, and that can push him maybe to 14.9, 15 points per game, and make him become, instead of the 38th ranked player, the 30th ranked player. He's not a second round guy, but he's a comfortable third and he shouldn't ever be going past the fourth, especially in rotisserie leagues, because his value in those is so much higher. Avery Bradley, 55 games for Braddles. He had his injuries. That Achilles problem was a real concern, and then he had some illness issues at the end of the year. 33 minutes, 16.3 points, 2 triples, 6 boards. Really upped his rebounding this year. Took that to another level, especially when Horford was out at the start of the year. 2 assists, 1.3 steals, 46, 73, and 39 were Braddles' percentages. Weirdly, the team was 3.2 points better off with him on the bench this year, which is weird. And after the All-Star break, he was the 154th ranked player. A big dip in Bradley's performance after the break. And some of that's due to his minutes dropping. He only played 19 games and only 30 minutes there. He also shot poorly, 44 from the field, 67 from the line, and was not as an impactful player. He's a guy that has been putting up, obviously impressive numbers throughout his career, but this was his best season from a fantasy point of view, from a real life point of view. For as good a defender as he is, he's not someone who's ever going to really get to that 2 steals per game mark, which could elevate him inside the top 40. I just don't think he's going to do that, but a steady progression in his shooting has been offset by a steady decline in his free throws. His free throws have gone from 80 to 79 to 78 to 73. So that's a weird regression. Also, he might be playing for the Bulls next season. Who knows how this trade is going to go down. So that is something to watch out for. And if he moves to the Bulls, I reckon he could jump up maybe 15, 16 spots, because I imagine if Butler goes from Chicago, Wade may decline his player option, and that enables an opportunity there for Bradley. Now, he is a fantastic defender. He's a fantastic player, and he does have a little bit of room for growth, but on this team, I'm not sure that he does. I'm not sure that he can be better in Boston than he was this year at that 16 and 6. He doubled his rebound rate, which is a phenomenal effort. The addition of a guy like Zizic, Ubesele, maybe Butler, maybe Hayward, that's going to impact what Bradley can do in a significant degree if he remains on Boston. So, like Thomas, I feel like this could be the upper limit of what his fantasy production is over the rest of his career. Goes to Chicago, that could definitely change. Jay Crowder was the 67th ranked player this season. He played 32 minutes a game in 72 games. 14 points, 2 triples, 6 boards, 2 assists, a steal, 46 and 81 and 40% from 3. I am not the biggest Jay Crowder fan, you'd be aware of that, but you have to be impressed with the fact that he was a plus 11.5 for the year. Led the team in on-off. That's a fantastic performance. But again, like a few of these Celtics teammates, he struggled after the break. 136th his ranking dropped to after that break. And to me, the player we saw after the break, where Crowder averaged 14, 6.9 on 45 and 75, that player was a little bit of a dip in his performance. It was more what I expect from him as a player. Not that I'm totally down on him and think he's terrible or anything like that. But I do look at him and go, I just don't think that he is quite as good as what some of his numbers have shown us over the course of the last couple of seasons. And he moves to another team, I don't see the ability for him as much to jump up as much as say what an Avery Bradley could. I'm not quite as in on what Amir Johnson can do. His shooting, though, has been an impressive part, especially this year. He took it to 40% after shooting just 34% last season, and that was really impressive for him to do that and get his true shooting at 61. That you have to give him credit for that, but his steal rate dropped off completely, and that was a big part of what had him challenging the top 50 last season for most of the years. That steal rate, it went through the roof last year, and it went back to normal this year. Speaking of steal rates, Marcus Smart, despite what you may consider a bad season from him, he was a top 100 player. He was the 97th ranked player for the season. The team was even in terms of on-off numbers with him. He's even better head-to-head guy, like a top 80 guy head-to-head. 30 minutes a game, and this is only in 30 minutes. 10.6 points, 1.2 threes, 4 boards, 4.5 assists, 1.6 steals, half a block. And he shot 36 from the field and 28 from 3 for a putrid true shooting of 49. He has got an enormous scope to get better. If he went to Chicago and they said, you are our point guard, as a Bulls fan, I would be over the moon. He would play more minutes. His assist rate would go up and he would get more assists. The steals are fantastic from him all the time. He is a very good rebounder from that position as well. You're talking about a guy that in 34 minutes could be a 4.5 to 5 rebound guy, could be a 5.5 to 6 assist guy, could be a two triples and 2 steals guy. The steals more likely than the triples, and averaging 15, 16 points in that. He just has to get that efficiency up, and that has consistently been a problem. If you're drafting Marcus Smart, you're pretty much punting field goal percentage, and anything you get on top of that is a bonus. But I have huge, huge hopes for Marcus Smart. Look, even if everything remained the same and he was playing his 30 minutes, because he's going to play 30 minutes at the 1, at the 2, at the 3. He's going to play in these positions. He is worth it on certain head-to-head teams in standard leagues. He is worth a draft pick, because he is likely to be a top 100 player, even higher when you take out his field goal percentage. And in those limited minutes, he can be that guy. And then if it goes up, well, then we've got a lot of value coming from Marcus Smart. And I'm pretty excited to see where he goes as he heads into his 4th season. But I still have a fair degree of hope with him. Even though the shooting's poor, he provides so much in so many other areas. My boy Kelly Olynyk was the 160th ranked player this season in just 20 minutes as well. 75 games, 9 points, 4.8 rebounds, 0.9 threes, 2 assists, 0.6 steals, 0.4 blocks, 51, 73, and 35 for a true shooting of 60% for Olynyk. If he plays 30 minutes, he's a top 70 player. I have no doubt about that. Him playing 30 minutes in Boston is never going to happen. So he's just one of those guys that we have to look at and go, okay, cool. It's just not going to happen. Stevens is not going to allow it. If he goes somewhere else, in restricted free agency, because the Celtics can't offer him a deal, because they're bringing in Griffin, they're bringing in Hayward. If he goes somewhere else and they say you're playing 28 minutes a night, he's going to be draftable. He hits threes, he gets blocks, he can rebound, he can pass, he can score, he can hit threes, he can do lots of different things. And people don't like Kelly Olynyk. I understand that they don't like him. I do. I think he's a valuable player, and he can be a very valuable fantasy guy. Now, on-off, it wasn't kind to him. He was a minus 5.8. But the use with Stevens, and again, Stevens is a very good coach, but he's not immune to criticism. The way that he constantly jerks guys around in that front court and moves them in and out of lineups and can't settle on anyone in that spot, when to me, it was clear that you had to give Olynyk those minutes and play him with Horford, and that started to happen towards the end, and he had some fantastic playoff performances. We saw that. He's never going to be as good as what he was in some of those games, but he also can be better than what we've seen. So I am a big Kelly Olynyk believer, not quite as high as what I am on Marcus Smart, because I feel like Smart's path to getting the minutes is a lot clearer. But they could both legit have top 50 upside in a perfect role. And that is something that you do need to pay attention to. Amir Johnson played 80 games and 20 minutes a game. He was the 161st ranked player for this season, and he was a stellar plus 9.3 in the on-off numbers and had a decently strong end to the season for him as well. Will he be back in Boston? I would be doubtful that Amir is back. He averaged 6.5 points, 4.5 boards, almost 2 assists, 0.6 steals, and 0.8 blocks at 58 and 67, and shot 41% from 3 for a true shooting of 63%, which is obviously very, very good for Amir. But those numbers, they're not fantastic for fantasy. Yes, he did sneak into the top 130 post-All-Star with some impressive numbers, but where is he going to go? That's going to be key. If he's in a role where they have to play him 30 minutes, then I like him as a late-round pick, but otherwise, he's older than you think. How old actually is he? He's 30 years old already. So the decline has already started to come. He's had persistent ankle problems throughout his career, and that's something that you don't feel like he's going to shake. Just always got a problem with those ankles. Him being able to play 28 minutes a night seems like a little bit of a pipe dream as well. I don't think he'll be able to do that, but he is a useful 14-teamer, maybe 16-teamer, and that could change depending on what happens with him this offseason. Terry Rozier, the savior, 74 games, 17 minutes, 5.5 points, 0.8 threes, 3 boards, 1.7 assists, and 0.6 steals. The shooting, as we alluded to earlier when I said he was pretty poor around the rim, that was an issue. 37% from the field, 77 from the line, and 32 from 3 for a true shooting of 47 is not good. But he is a super aggressive rebounder, one of the best rebounding point guards in the NBA. Averaged 3 rebounds in 17 minutes as a point guard is a stupendously good number. And we hear him being the butt of jokes. Can't trade the untouchable Terry Rozier when all these trade talks went up. Well, maybe he is the guy instead of Marcus Smart that goes to Chicago and he becomes the starting point guard. And if that's the case, top 120 is definitely something to look at. That rebounding, he can pass and he can get steals. And then you're just waiting for the shooting and scoring to come along, which I believe can happen. So he is a guy with a tremendous amount of intrigue at the moment if he does happen to be a part of this 3-way deal that could be happening with the Sixers and the Bulls. There is a lot to... I think Smart probably has a higher fantasy ceiling and he's a better player, and he's currently a better player and will be a better player, but Rozier is a guy who, if he is a starting point guard, he is a guy that will be a draftable player. There is no doubt about that in my mind, and those rebounding numbers can be super impressive. Rebound, steals, assists, add some threes. That's a pretty good foundation for a solid fantasy player. And he's a pretty good free throw shooter. Jaylen Brown impressed me more than I thought he would, but the fact remains he had a shit fantasy season. 316th was his ranking this year, 17 minutes, 6.6 points, 0.6 threes, 2.8 rebounds, 0.8 assists, half a steal, 45, 69, and 34 as his percentages. He was always projected to be a bad fantasy player for this season at least. The minute situation he came into was not a good situation for him to get big minutes and put up big fantasy stats, and all that came to fruition. But his play on the court was super impressive, and if Jay Crowder remains and Hayward and Butler don't arrive, Brown in 2 years' time is going to be starting for this team over Crowder, and I have zero doubt about that. Will he ever be a good fantasy prospect? No, I don't think he can ever be a top 50 guy. Not saying he can't be a good player. I don't think he'd be a good fantasy top 50 guy, but he can be a solid top 100, top 120 sort of player in a couple of years' time. So don't value him as this super supreme fantasy prospect. While he was excellent and one of the best rookies of this season and blew all my expectations out of the water, he didn't blow them out of the water from a fantasy point of view, and that's what we're here talking about. So he's going to be a guy who gets minutes. There's no doubt he's going to get minutes, and he's going to get big minutes at some point. Maybe he goes to Chicago. but that doesn't necessarily translate into big fantasy stats from him. So he's not going to be that, oh, he's going to start next year and play 34 and let's draft him at pick 70, because that's not going to work out. He'd be the guy you take at with your 12th pick, with your 13th pick, and go, well, maybe, but more likely he's going to hover around this range with some subpar free throws and field goals and lack of steals and no assists and below average rebounding, and that's sort of what he does. But his on-court play, super impressive, and I was really impressed by him. Jonas Jerebko, love this guy. Don't know where he's going to end up or what's going to happen for him. I'd love for him to end up, say, in a Sacramento situation and get 25 a game. I reckon he can be a really useful fantasy player. He only played 16 minutes a game this year, 3.8 points, 3.5 rebounds, 0.6 threes, 0.3 steals, 44 and 70 with 35% from three. But part of the I guess, non-appeal for him from a fantasy point of view is that he doesn't do anything defensively. And that is the concern. He can hit some threes, he can rebound, he can be a useful on-court player, but his future is capped by the fact that he doesn't pass and he doesn't get defensive numbers. And that's going to limit, even in a bigger role, him ever becoming probably even a top 150 player. But I do like your Repco. Gerald Green played 47 games, 11 minutes. I have no idea why he played as many games or started as many games as what he actually did. 5.6 points and 0.8 threes. At this point, Gerald Green is a 3-point streaming specialist. If you get desperate, and Troy Daniels and Wayne Ellington and Channing Frye and Iman Shumpert, even the guys like that are off the wire, then you can add Green. There's no fantasy future for Gerald Green at this point. But it was impressive, I guess, to see him actually start, even though they were the wrong decisions and he wasn't good when he did it. It was interesting that he was actually still in the NBA and doing that. Back to Jaylen Brown, actually, he was a team worst minus 7.9 as well, which I guess is a little bit of a surprise. Green was a minus 2.9. Tyler Zeller, 10 minutes a game, 3.5 and 2.5 with 0.5 blocks. He's just not good. He's nowhere near his brother. He is Miles Plumlee level, in my opinion, as a center, maybe a Festus Ezeli level player. He is not good, and whoever signs him is not going to be in a position to use him for big minutes, and I see no way that he is a top 300 player at any point in his career moving forward. James Young, who has been an absolute disappointment throughout his entire NBA career, 2 points per game, 0.4 threes, 0.9 rebounds, nothing else. I would take a flyer on him, though. As a team, he's still really young, so I would take that flyer and say maybe we can get anything. Can anything come from having James Young? Can we get anything to develop? And I think the answer is yes, let's try it. But from fantasy, you're talking 30-team league deep, 350 players deep to take a flyer on James Young, because his potential to turn into even a top 250 player is very, very minimal. He hasn't really shown us anything positive that he does that even translates all that well to fantasy. Jordan Mickey's a guy that has translated well to fantasy in some of his per-minute numbers, but I think he took a big step back this season. He was a guy that was a fairly good shot blocker, but that didn't even come through this year. With the arrival of Zizic next season, that's going to impact Mickey, but he also could be helped by the departure of Amir and potentially Kelly Olynyk and Jonas Jerebko as well. So there's something there for Mickey, but I thought he took some significant steps backwards this season. Demetrius Jackson only played 5 games, 15 minutes in total, 2 points, 0.6 assists, so those numbers look great on a per-minute basis, 75% shooting. And as I said, Smart, Rozier, Bradley, any of those guys could be gone in the coming weeks. So he might push into a third point guard role, and I like him to be, have a chance to sneak inside the top 350 next season, maybe even the top 300. That might be pushing it, but I do still believe in Demetrius Jackson. I think there is something there with him. And I think that, again, he is a guy that I take him over a James Young in a deeper league, for example. I think there's something there with the potential of that opening up for him, with Fultz not arriving, with Rozier, with Smart, with these guys potentially moving on. Maybe he can push into another role and start to push forward, and maybe he could have a top 250 season in the next 5 years. I think that that's a possibility, and that's only exciting players in deep leagues. But it is still something for the guy who was the 451st ranked player this season. Questions. Jordan says, why are they allowed to fleece Brian Colangelo? Obviously referencing this trade news. Let's see what the trade is. But yeah, I know that you've got your Colangelo feelings, Jordan, given you're a Raptors fan. Let's see how it all goes down. I don't know how I feel about... I know I like Fultz a lot going to Philadelphia. That's fantastic. I don't know what they're giving up, so I don't know how I feel about it from an asset point of view. But if it enables the Celtics to get Butler, I think it's okay. But let's just see how much Colangelo actually gives up. Barry says, Ubesile, how many minutes does he get this season? What's his ceiling? Minutes? I got no idea. There's just too much in flux with this team. I think 25 would be the absolute max, and I think 20 is probably the absolute max for Ubesile. What's his ceiling? Top 100, top 75 probably I think is his upside. Benjamin Shavar, what is Isaiah Thomas's ideal role in the NBA? This is it for him and for what he can do. This is his ideal role for a team. I think you want someone to play alongside him with a little bit more ball handling, let him play a little bit more off ball as well. But I can't see much wrong with his role here. It's just going to be, it's not a role problem that limits him in the playoffs. It's a size problem. It's an Isaiah Thomas problem. And it didn't impact him as much in these playoffs as what it did in previous playoffs. So maybe that's a little bit overblown. Yuval, IT, Bradley, and Smart, which of them would you go forward after next season given their projected future contracts? Who would I want out of that group? IT, Bradley, and Smart. I really like Smart. And yeah, Smart's going to get a much smaller contract than Isaiah Thomas and a smaller contract than Bradley, I think, as well. So it'd probably be him age and contract-wise as I look to the future. Pro says, Ante Zizic, will he be worth drafting in 12-teamers? It is borderline, but with your last pick, I wouldn't have any sort of issue with that. And Muhammad ends us off with, he says, there's too many unknowns for next year. Zizic, the first pick, Yabasile, Demetrius, Mickey, Abdul Nader, who didn't play for them at all this year. They have to trade for more proven players. Why? Yes, they're all unknowns, but they're all bench guys. They're not having. I know what Zizic is going to. I know Zizic is going to be a solid player. They're not necessarily losing all these other guys. Look, if you can get Butler, it's the move that you go for, no doubt. But I don't think they need to make pissy middle of the road type of trades so they can get proven contributors like Wilson Chandler or bullshit like that. I don't think that's the sort of thing they necessarily need to do if it involves giving up, some high valued prospects. These guys, Ubesile, Zizic, if they do bring in Fultz, they won't be expected to carry the load tremendously. And you're talking about upgrading Jonas Jerebko to Ante Zizic, upgrading Terry Rozier to Markel Fultz. These are not, or Gerald Green. These are not that tough of decisions. And Abdul Nader, I don't even know if he makes the team next season at all. And Mickey, he could be a casualty in a trade that gets thrown out as well. So he didn't show a huge amount. They could bring back guys like Olynyk, of course, as well to fill that role. All right, we're done for this Boston Celtics podcast. Again, more news might have come out by the time you listen to this, so I do apologize. We have got 3 more season in review podcasts to go. Then we'll have a mock draft and then the NBA draft review. And then the week after that, before Summer League starts, before free agency, it'll be a little bit more sporadic because I have a little bit of time off in that week. And then I am heading over to the States in July to Utah Summer League, to Vegas Summer League, and then I'll be in San Francisco and Chicago. And at this point, I am planning on, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but for people in Chicago, planning on some sort of Chicago meetup. I think I'll probably do it. I'm going to see the Cardinals and the Cubs on the Friday that I'm in Chicago, and maybe after the game there. So anyone's in Chicago and is interested in some sort of meetup, let me know and we can organise something. So I am thinking of doing something probably on that Friday in Chicago after the Cubs and Cardinals game. But let me know if you are interested in that. Subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. It is the best way of helping the show out. That would be much appreciated. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Markel Fultz.